We're compelled by the call of the woods, but the magical whispers of old trees aren't the only things found out there. Some brave souls went hiking, but were left with more questions than answers. Here are some of their stories. Welcome, fellow chill seekers, to Lady Grimm, where the veil between our world and the unknown grows thin. I am your guide through these chilling tales. Take a deep breath and get comfortable, for we're about to descend into the abyss. Welcome to Lady Grimm, where the paranormal comes alive. My family has a cabin deep in the Alaska wilderness. This is the kind of cabin you need a four-wheel drive truck to get to. When I was in my early 20s, I decided to go up to the cabin in late summer. My parents were busy with my younger sister going to college, and the roads would be impassable if an early snow fell. I made it to the cabin early in the afternoon and opened it up. After unloading some of my stuff, I packed a light backpack to go to the lake about a half-mile away. I had almost reached the lake when I heard something large cross the path behind me. I turned to look, but whatever it was disappeared into the brush at the edge of the trail. I was about 15 feet away from whatever it was, and I stood silently listening for a minute to see if I could identify what it was. I had hoped it was a deer, and not a bear or a moose. When I didn't hear anything, I reached into my bag for my bear mace and had it ready for the rest of the hike to the lake. I wanted to put some distance between myself and that area in case it was a bear, so I picked up the pace. Being from Alaska, bear safety is always in the back of my mind, but I still respect and fear them. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When you're alone, your mind imagines the worst-case scenario, and I imagined a grizzly with cubs popping out of the woods at any moment. But nothing like that happened. When I got to the lake, I stripped down to my bathing suit and sandals and jumped into the cool water. I was lying on my back, the water muffling my ears, when I saw movement on the lake edge by my backpack. I saw something crouched down over my backpack with its back to me. At first, I thought it was a light-colored bear, but as I splashed upright in the water, it turned to look at me. It was a skinny woman, wearing what must have at one point been a short white dress, but it was smudged with dirt now and torn at the hem. She was barefoot and her hair was a tangled mess. Her face was thin and dirty, and she snarled at me before letting out a growl. Then, without getting up, she turned and army crawled low to the ground into the woods. I didn't want to go near the shore, but I kept an eye on the trees as I reached my bag, its contents now strewn all over the rocks at the water's edge. The only thing she took were my keys. Luckily, my truck key ring was separate, but back at the cabin. I dreaded having to go back there, but I needed to get out of there. Who knows what that woman wanted and who she might be with? I ran back to the cabin, grabbed my other bag without even changing, and drove home to tell my parents. No way I was going to stay up there a single moment longer. But the worst part? My house keys and cabin keys were on the same key ring. My family changed the locks on both the cabin and the house the following week. My friend and I went hiking over Memorial Day weekend in New Hampshire. At the time, we were both novice hikers, so we stayed on the trails and planned to use the Forest Service shelters along the way. On the first afternoon, we reached the first shelter just before dusk These shelters are three-sided log cabins with the front of the cabin open to the elements. We made dinner, hung the rest of our food in a tree to keep bears at bay, and kept a fire going until around 10 when we fell asleep. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up. I could hear my friend snoring lightly nearby, and it took me a few minutes to realize where I was. I was staring at the back of the cabin, and as my eyes adjusted in the darkness, I recognized the dark grooves between each log in the wall. I normally sleep well at night, so something outside the shelter must have disturbed me. I turned to look towards the open side of the shelter. There was the distinct dark shape of a person peering around the edge of the wall. I could just make out the head and shoulder, but the night was too dark to see a face or any more detail. As I sat up, the figure moved out of sight around the wall of the shelter. I fumbled for my flashlight, and the noise woke my friend. She mumbled something, and I hushed her. I could hear her sitting up. I aimed my flashlight towards the darkness beyond the shelter's edge, but there was nothing there but trees. I quietly told my friend what I'd seen, and we listened for steps or movement sounds, anything outside the shelter. But we didn't hear anything. That was almost worse. If there was no movement, that person could still be out there. I hopped off the edge of the shelter and stepped away from it into the darkness, my big flashlight out in front of me to use as a weapon. I wanted enough distance between me and whoever might be around the corner of that shelter. I walked the perimeter of the shelter, expecting someone to jump out at me at any second, but there was nobody there. I climbed back under the roof, but after that scare, there was no chance of us getting back to sleep. We rationalized that I'd had a dream, or that maybe it was a deer, or something else that belonged in the woods, unlike us. At dawn, it rained hard, and we were thankful to be inside the shelter, despite the weird night we'd had. The rain let up just after 7, and we sloshed through the mud to our hanging food bags so we could make breakfast. As we rounded the corner of the shelter, we saw large foot impressions in the mud leading away from the shelter. This meant whoever had been watching us sleep had been just outside the shelter until after dawn. They had been there for hours, just on the other side of the shelter wall. Thanks for listening, and I hope you're enjoying my stories. Leave a comment, subscribe, let me know you're out there. I'm lucky to live about an hour from Yosemite. If I get out of work early enough, I can make it into the park for a decent hike and be back home before nightfall. About 3 years ago, I saw something terrifying in the park. We had a slow morning at work, and when they asked for volunteers to leave early, I jumped at the chance for a longer than normal hike and got to the park by 2. I'd been wanting to try a new trail for a while, but needed to be sure I'd have plenty of time to get out of the woods before dark. The trail was beautiful, but desolate. I didn't see any other hikers and felt lucky because Yosemite could be crowded with tourists. When I reached my halfway point, I sat against a tree and pulled out my sketch pad and charcoal. Sketching in the woods was like church to me. As I relaxed and drew, I tore each finished drawing out of the pad and set them beside me to start the new sketch. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to the sound of crickets and frogs, and a sliver of a moon was peeking through the trees. It was full dark now. I stuffed my things back into my bag and felt around for a flashlight, but I hadn't intended to stay this late, and I hadn't packed one. I shoved the sketch pad and my remaining charcoal into my bag and started down the path I had hiked earlier. Hiking at night is terrifying because your senses are heightened in the darkness. You're surrounded by night creature sounds, and each step is uncertain because you can't see your footing. Every shadow, every sound became a potential threat. I walked with my arms out in front of me, shielding my face from low branches as I made my way down the moonlit path. Ahead of me, I saw what looked like a flyer on a tree just above eye level. As I approached it in the moonlight, I recognized it as one of my drawings. It had been chaotically scribbled over with charcoal and was stabbed into the tree with a piece of broken glass. I stared at it as I realized someone had to have been close enough to me to take my drawing and charcoal while I'd been sleeping. I ripped it off the tree and started running down the trail. It wasn't long before I saw another smudged drawing up ahead, again stabbed into the tree with a jagged piece of glass. I ran past this one, too scared to stop. It was so dark I couldn't see anything just off the trail, only thick, dark woods. My heart was pounding in my chest like a wild horse. Whoever had stabbed my drawings into the trees was up ahead, probably waiting for me. I thought of detouring through the woods, but I didn't know the area, and who knows where the person or people were now. I stopped to catch my breath and looked up to see a third sketch pinned to a tree ahead. As I scanned the darkness, I saw movement. On the opposite side of the trail, about 15 feet above the ground, something dark was perched in a tree. It was still, but I could feel it watching me. The air was thick and heavy, and my skin was crawling. I had to get past it, to go under it, to get to the other side of the trail. I'd have to go under it to get to safety. I took a few steps as we watched each other. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was big like a human. I remember hoping it was an animal, and then immediately realizing how awful the alternative was if I was hoping it was a big human-sized animal. But as my eyes darted down to the drawings, I knew this was no animal. And it hadn't moved. As I inched closer on the trail, I'd be under it soon. I continued to stare at it, crouched there above the trail and the tree, entirely in the shadows. I thought for a second that maybe it was a distraction, something to keep me looking up and not see someone else coming towards me from below. I tried scanning all around me, but saw nothing, and heard nothing but my own heart in my ears. I tried to control my breath, but each inhale was like razor blades against my dry throat. I felt like a mouse heading unavoidably into the grip of a giant snake. My mind was flooded with the primal urge to escape. But I had to get past it. I was almost under the tree where it was perched. I didn't take my eyes off it now. It was too close. I stepped wide towards the opposite side of the trail, neck craned up watching, when I stepped on a branch and heard a crack. That was all it took. I leaned into a run just before I was under it. I saw the creature's head turn into the moonlight, its mouth angled upward, curved into a grin, exposing long, sharp teeth. I ran like the devil himself was chasing me, ignoring the branches cutting my face and arms. I reached the trailhead with a cramp in my side and my legs on fire, too scared to look back. I saw my car parked in the moonlight and ran to it, tears streaming down my cheeks. I got inside and locked my door, watching the trees for a second, but there was no movement. It hadn't chased me. But as I started my car and peeled away, something dipped from overhead, casting a large, winged shadow in the moonlight. I haven't been back to Yosemite since that night. When I was a kid, I lived with my mom in Maine, between Sebago Lake and the White Mountains in New Hampshire. We used to hike all around the area. It was what we did for fun when I was little, since she was a single mom and couldn't afford summer vacations. We lived in the woods, and I was never afraid of them. But one hike changed all that. It was fall, when the leaves were changing and colorful and the air was crisp. This was the time of year when our sleepy one-lane road got the most traffic, with people sightseeing along the mountains to see the changing leaves. By busy, I mean 4 or 5 cars an hour. We're pretty far out there. The trail closest to our house is part of an extended network of backwoods trails that leads up towards the mountains. Stepping out our back door, there's about 60 feet of flat land. Then the woods fill in and the trail starts its incline into the thicker woods. This time of year is also hunting season. To venture into the woods during hunting season, you had to wear hunter orange clothing, so you wouldn't be mistaken for a deer or even a moose or bear if someone was feeling daring enough to hunt out of season. We were on the trail by 1 and had hiked for a few hours when it started to rain. We pulled on our bright orange rain jackets and pulled up the hoods, which limited what we could hear around us, but sounds were already muffled because of the rain. Suddenly, we stopped and sniffed the air around us. Cigarette smoke, which meant someone was nearby. Seeing people on this trail was unusual, even during leaf season. It was that remote. We became more alert, scanning around for the smoker, but we couldn't see anyone. Suddenly, a shot echoed ahead, and we heard the impact of a bullet hitting a tree just to the left of us. My mom called out, warning the hunter that we were humans and not prey. But then came a second shot. There was no way a hunter could think we were deer since we were wearing bright orange jackets and pants. We turned and ran back down the trail. Another shot. My mom pulled me off the trail and we started running through the brush and thick woods, with wet branches hitting us as we barreled through. The ground was slippery with wet leaves and it was hard not to slip. We heard 2 more shots behind us and kept running. After about a mile, I couldn't run anymore and was slowing down. My mom pulled me behind a tree and we leaned against it, struggling to catch our breath. We listened for any sign of pursuit from the hunter behind us. But all we could hear was the steady falling rain. We were way off trail, but my mom had a compass and we followed it towards home. We were trembling and kept looking back to see if we were being followed. About a quarter mile from our house, we smelled cigarette smoke again. He must have doubled back from the trail to follow us, and if we could smell it, he was close. We ran again, but this time back towards the trail, since it was clear we'd make better time and put him behind us. Running headlong towards the trail, we almost fell over some trash next to a box. But with a closer look, we saw it wasn't trash. It was a dark green military-style duffel bag and a flat, shallow cage. I don't know what was in the bag, but there was rope in the cage. A cage that looked like a dog crate but was flatter and homemade. More human-shaped than dog. As exhausted as we were, we ran full tilt to the house. The scariest moments were running across the open area of our backyard towards the back door of our house. This would be the perfect place to make a kill shot unobstructed by trees. As my legs pumped with the last of my energy, I remember naively thinking I just had to make it inside those doors, and then we'd be safe. It was almost dark as we slammed the back door and locked it, something we rarely did living this far out in the woods. My mom dialed the police, and I stood by the back window watching the tree line. As I heard her telling the dispatcher our address, I saw an orange ember suddenly blaze in the darkness at the edge of the trees. And then a second ember. A single pale arm reached out from the shadows and pointed a finger gun straight at me. My world narrowed down to these solitary glowing embers as I realized we had been hunted by not one, but two terrifying predators.